This week on Quality Digest Live, measuring the effectiveness of training programs.
And we analyze the real-world use of high-level statistics. That and more when we come back.
Welcome back to Quality Digest Live for July 8th, 2011. QDL is your weekly look at who and what is making news in the world of quality. I'm Dirk Ducharme, Editor-in-Chief of Quality Digest.
And I'm publisher Mike Richmond. Now, in a minute, I'm going to launch into an article by Miriam Boudreau, but before I do, I'd like to preview a story that we're going to be covering later in the show on the practical applications of statistics in your environment. We want to know how you use SPC in your world. Do you read our articles on the subject? Do you always understand them? I don't necessarily, but usually. But we aren't statisticians, and maybe you aren't either. So we encourage you to write us a quick email at qdl@qualitydigest.com and let us hear your SBC war stories. We'll respond to them when we get to that segment here in a very little while. So thanks. Okay. Now I want to start this week with a little thought experiment, Dirk.
All right, I'm ready.
If a training class occurs in the forest and those attending don't pay attention, does it make any noise? Okay. I'm being silly. It's a rhetorical question, thought experiment. I'm being silly.
How zen.
How zen. It's very zen. We'll get back to that later, too. But Miriam Boudreau was serious in her article on attendance, on training courses and attendance sheets. And the article was called, "Are Attendance Sheets Appropriate for Measuring Training Effectiveness?" And that appeared in the Wednesday issue of Quality Digest Daily. Now, Miriam looks at training, and she looks at that again through the prism of these attendance sheets. And of course, those are the sheets that you kind of just check off when you've attended a training and say, yes, you attended, you were there, you were present and accounted for, and you listened to whatever the trainer.
Or at least you showed up for when they took attendance.
You were there. Maybe you ducked out and had a cigarette at lunch, you know, or in the men's room, whatever it is. You were there, at least for part of the training. But now, the question really is, and gets to the heart of it, is how effective is that? You know, you've been to the course, you sat through it, and let's say you even, as most of us did, you sat through the whole thing and you took your notes and you listened. But were you really engaged? Were you there? Did you learn anything from that? And that's really the key point.
And more important, I think her point is, does the manager know whether you learned anything
whether
or
you
even
learned anything.
attended? Yeah.
And there's even another issue is, as we know, with ISO 9001 and other quality management system standards or other standards in general, training, documentation of training is a key requirement in these standards. So you need to have that documentation, and attendance sheets many times are just a very basic, bare levels, bare minimum, as Miriam calls it, confirmation that you did attend the training, and it can kind of pass as the documentation requirement. But really the issue here, and what Miriam is getting to is this effective? Does it help you improve your organization? Now, we all know that courses like this, many of these training courses, can cost thousands and thousands of dollars. Certainly a black belt course or even a green belt course can cost a lot of money. Certified quality engineer course, a lot of these courses can cost a heck of a lot of money for the organization that's sending their employees to this training. What is the organization getting out of that, right? And is there really a payback for the money that you invest in that? Now, obviously, you get the certification, and you can put that on your wall if you're a quality professional. You can say, hey, I'm a CQE, sure, whatever. But if you don't take that knowledge and bring it to your organization, really, what's the value of that? And again, getting back to this idea of the attendance sheets, that's the barest minimum for how you can document this.
Right.
Miriam had some suggestions about what would be better, and you might want to run this on the screen share. She had some suggestions about how we could better handle this. For measurement training effectiveness. First, evaluate the training after it's completed personally with the supervisor, with the employee who went.
So don't take the word of the
attendance sheet that well, you can say the person was there, but to really understand what you learned, have a good in-depth interview with that person. But this ties in with point 3. Also, you need to have done pre-evaluations of that employee, so you know the baseline for where he or she was at before they went to the training, so that you can look at that and say, well, this person had these skills, and these are the skills that the person has now. Required demonstrations of the acquired knowledge. If the person went through a program where they, for instance, now you can use a certain tool, let's say.
Sure.
Get out on the floor, make sure they can use that tool, make sure that they learned what they need to learn to do that job better. And finally, make sure that the training organization provides assessments too, not just an attendance sheet, but an assessment of the individual, where they were before, where they were afterwards.
And I would say initially, especially if you're working with a new training organization. We're assuming this isn't in-house. Let's say this is
right.
This is
third party
sourced out. Okay. I would say that until you have confidence in the assessment being given by the training organization, I would do 1 and 4. I would say 1 could probably go away once you've kind of vetted the organization.
Sure.
It's like, you know, that when they say that so-and-so is taking the test and they really know their skills and you've verified it, after you've done that for a while, you probably can trust the organization.
Sure, but you want to make sure that as a supervisor that you've sat with that person after the training and that you've spent your due diligence, your time to make sure that they get it. And they get it, not just the general training of what that is, but how it applies to what that person needs to do in the organization, because it's never an apples to apples comparison. There's always going to be slight tweaks that you need to bring to the specific job that person needs to do. The reason why I really enjoyed this article and I wanted to talk about it in a little more depth here is because I see an analogy here between training like this and certification to a standard like ISO 9001, for instance. Many times we look at it and we say, okay, we're going to check the box, we're going to get our certification, we're going to put it on the wall, and that's it. That's the point of it, is to get that certification. Get the cert and move on. If you're certified to ISO 9001, you're trying to get recertified and your auditor's coming in, people have meetings for weeks and months beforehand. Oh, what are we going to tell the auditor? How are we going to handle this question? What are we going to do with that? How are we going to paper over maybe some of these issues that we have? That's not the reason why you get certified to ISO 9001. You do that because you want to get better as an organization. The rigor of having that auditor come in and really probe and poke and ask and make a nuisance of him or herself is because you want to improve your organization. The certification on the wall is just the end result. It's a confirmation. But the process of going through that, just like with training, the process of going through the training, of bringing that knowledge in, that's the value, and that's why you do it.
And I would say, not only for the organization, but on a personal level then, you know, very often, let's say, my wife's a nurse, so she has to get so many CEs, continuing education units, every year. And that's true of a lot of professions, is part of your job requirement is to get a CE. Okay, fine, let me go through my catalog, oh, here's a CE I can get, whatever, right?
Check the box.
Check the box. And go out there and you get it, you come back with your little cert. Well, okay, great. So now you can go to your boss and you can say, oh, look, see, I got my CEs, and okay, I can renew my license and all that kind of stuff. So what? I mean, on a personal level, you should be wanting to get something out of that besides the cert. The idea is that you're actually gaining a skill, becoming better at what you are, just to go for the purpose of getting a credit or a union or a unit, and then having your boss say, okay, well, did you go? Yes, I did. And then that's the end of the story.
Sheet. Here's the attendance sheet, right.
Like, who cares?
It's the lowest of low-hanging fruit.
Yeah.
It really is. And that's not, again, that's not the purpose why those CEs were instituted as
right, it was keep you abreast of what's going on.
Keep you fresh.
Yeah, and the same thing of professional certs. You know, regardless of, you're going to get some sort of ASQ certification, whatever it is.
Or black belt, or whatever it is.
Yeah, I mean, the idea is that you're walking away with something that's not just going to give you, you know, say, oh, I've got a cert, so now I can make more money, which, by the way, to a certain extent is true.
Yeah.
But hopefully you're not only making yourself more valuable personally to get more money on your salary just because you've got a cert, but hopefully there's a certain amount of knowledge that you're going to actually impart some value to the company that's paying you more money now.
That's right. It's not about getting your ticket punched. It's about the journey, where you're going with that ticket, and that's what really is important. So that's why I wanted to cover the story on the show today. So. Okay.
Well, speaking of journeys and Zen-like things, we have another Zen-like article. This one.
John Flagg.
This article was one of 2 statistics articles this week from John Flagg. Now, we had 2 articles, one from John Flagg, one from Don Wheeler. Don Wheeler writes for us every month, very popular author, gets a lot of comments on pretty much any statistical article he writes. John Flagg has also been around for a long time. Just started writing for us recently. I think he's going to probably be putting in an article every month or 2, so we definitely want to keep our eyes on John.
Sure.
John is kind of, so people know, John is kind of in the same camp, I would say, in a lot of ways as Wheeler. And this article actually points one of these out. The name of this article was "The Sound of One Tail Flapping." It's kind of a play on the, you know, the one hand clapping. And giving a 10, nobody, okay.
But the tail in this case is...
The tail in this case, we're talking the tails of distributions. Yeah. And this gets back to the whole non-normal distributions. Do we care? Data. Do we have to transform the data? Yeah. Do we even care about the tails? And I won't go into the statistical details of this article because
we can't.
Basically, that's it. I failed the Statistics for Dummies course. So, but what's interesting about this is it does bring up this question that seems to be a recurring theme for our audience, which is non-normal distributions. Do I transform the data? Do I care about the distribution percentages within the tail? Does all of this matter to me? Wheeler and Flagg would say, use your regular calculations that you've been doing. Don't do transformations. That's something that Wheeler pounds on like crazy. We have other authors on the flip side of that who say, no, we do care about what's in the tails. We do care about transforming the data so that we can do manipulations with them and so forth. What's interesting about this for me is that every time we run these statistics articles, we get a lot of comments, and the comments are typically from other statisticians.
Practitioners in the space.
Exactly. And often other writers for Quality Digest, and they kind of banter this back and forth.
And it's great content. Many times the content in the comments are as interesting, if not maybe more so, than the article itself. And you're going to have one you're going to show here from...
from Bill Levinson.
From Bill Levinson, yeah.
Bill basically would disagree with, Bill Levinson, another one of our contributors, would disagree with Flagg and Wheeler on data transformations and what's going on in the tails and so forth. And in the entirety of Bill Levinson's comment, he does say that he disagrees with John Flagg on it. However, at the end of it, he has a very interesting comment. The sound of one tail flapping, which is this article, has definitely stimulated my interest in seeing whether a synergy between process economics, and remember, it all boils down to economics. You're doing this stuff for a reason. And the use of correct underlying distribution can be carried even further to overturn existing paradigms about statistical process control. What's interesting about this is, and why I appreciate Levinson is kind of a contrarian on many different issues. Mm-hmm. However, what's really important, I think, about Levinson and his attitude is that, I may disagree, but you know what? You've raised some interesting points. You're making me think. You're making others think. It's good to look at the synergy between economics and how we deal with SBC. It's good to question, as Wheeler does frequently, how we're handling industrial statistics within the workplace. You have to question these things, and people like Wheeler have to question them.
Why? For the economic reasons.
For the economic reasons, because you've got to make sure you're doing the right thing. Now, speaking of Wheeler, Wheeler also had an article that even I could understand this time. His article was the problems with risk priority numbers. Now, I'll go through this real quick because we're kind of running along. Risk priority numbers, as some of you may know, are a way of prioritizing problems with a failure modes and effects analysis. Sure. And essentially, it works like this: we have a little table. Here is an example of some risk priority numbers. The first column is the severity of the problem. You rank the severity of the problem on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being not very severe, 10 being very severe.
Potentially.
Potentially. Likelihood of occurrence, on a 1 to 10 scale. How likely is it? Will it happen? How unlikely? And likelihood of detection. Can we actually detect this problem? Yes, we definitely can. Very high likelihood that we can detect it, or impossible to detect. Right. And the way RPNs work, according to the Failure Mode and Effects Analysis Manual,
how they're calculated,
is you give each of these a score and you multiply them. Wheeler just rips this thing to shreds.
Deservedly so, yeah.
Yeah, and here's why. He says, well, here's a couple of examples. If you're familiar with RPN numbers, you may have already noticed this, but if you haven't, this is very enlightening. Okay, so problem number 1. We have a problem in an automobile design. The severity of the problem is, well, it could cause the car to crash.
Fatal accident.
Fatal accident. So this is a very serious problem, very severe. Likelihood of occurrence, very high, so we'll give it a 9. Likelihood of detection, pretty good. We can probably find this in the design phase, so we'll give it moderately high. We'll give it a 4. Multiply all those 3 numbers together, and you get
360.
Let's look at the other end. We have a blemish problem. fit, let's say a fit problem, and maybe a door fit problem.
Sure.
Okay. That's not a very serious problem. It's a cosmetic problem. It's a usability problem. Maybe it's a sales problem. We'll give that a very low severity. We'll call it a 4. It's not life-threatening. Likelihood of occurrence, also very high. Likelihood of detection, this one's almost impossible to detect in the design phase.
Right.
So what do we have? An RPN number also of 360.
4
so
times
what do we
9
have?
times 10.
A potentially deadly design error in the car versus a blemish. A blemish. And they both have the same RPN number, which means they're both given the same weight in terms of
FMA,
what problem do I need to look at first.
So what does Don suggest to change this?
Well, number one, he wants to throw the whole thing out to begin with. But what he does do is, like, if you have to rank these things, there is a way to do it. You can tell from his tone that he's still not very excited about it, but at least this one makes some sense. He says, look, rather than on a scale of 1 to 10 for each of these, do 1 to 5. Then create a 3-digit, we won't call it, he calls an SOD number, and I can't remember what the SOD stands for, but he creates his own little acronym for it, as is Don. So the first number is going to be the severity number. The next number is going to be the likelihood of occurrence number, and the last number is going to be the likelihood of detection. And you create a 3-digit number in that order: severity, occurrence, detection. Then you just order them from highest to lowest.
Sure.
That is going to actually get you somewhere closer to where you need to be.
Because what's happening here, the way that RPNs are done right now, is these are all equivalent.
Yeah, this entire table is equivalent. They're exactly the same thing.
Severity versus likelihood of detection, likelihood of occurrence, those are all equally weighted. What Don is suggesting is weight them in order. Obviously, severity of problem is going to be the most important of those 3 factors.
Sure.
So put that first, then comes the likelihood of occurrence, then comes the likelihood of detection. Now people could argue this and say, well, likelihood of detection is very important as well. Sure, it is.
Yeah.
But this is just a better way.
Yeah, he's not, like, you can tell he's not entirely excited about this, but it's really, he's just ripping to shreds the idea of, and actually he also kind of points out that he doesn't say to do this, but to me it's kind of implied. If you already have your RPN table, if you simply took each of these numbers and divided it in 2, that would give you your 1 to 5 scale.
Right.
Then combine those numbers together and you have his new number. So for instance, on this first one, the 10 would be a 5.
Sure.
The very high would be a 4 or 5, call it a 5.
Whatever,
and it'd be 2. So the number for this first one would be a 5, 4, 2. Now you've got it in his scale.
Right.
You do that for all of it, rank it top to bottom, and now you have something that actually makes more sense.
So the 555s and the 554s, the 553s.
Those would all go together, and then, yeah, exactly.
Makes more sense probably than this, although this is pretty deeply embedded in certain systems.
So I love this. I love this real world stuff. So.
Well, this particular article statistically is more accessible than some of the things that we've covered, and that's a point that we wanted to kind of get to today. We talked about this in our story meeting yesterday, is this idea that we want to know from our readers how you're using statistics, right? We want to know if these articles that we're putting out, and again, this one from Don was a little more accessible. The one from John was a little more obtuse in some ways. Obtuse
for us.
For us, right, right. But I think that we want to know from you what you're using, how you're using statistics. So write us, if not on this show, write into QDL@qualitydigest.com and let us know what you're doing with stats and how we can better cover statistics for you. And as you mentioned, Don and John, Davis Balistracci, Steve Willett, a lot of our statistical writers are very good at responding to any comments that you put forth on their articles. So when you see an article from them, if you don't understand it, write in. Explain, let us help you explain it, and let the authors help explain it to you as well. And one other thing I should mention on that is we plan to at some point be bringing some of these people on the show in form of Skype interview, and perhaps so you'll have an opportunity to interface directly with those people here on the show.
Yep, excellent.
Good stuff. All right, well, thanks, Dirk. Well, that's our show for this Friday. We want to thank you for joining us. Before we close, I want to remind you all and tell you all that we're going to be running a video next week on Quality Digest. You can find it in our video demo center. It was an interview that we did with Norbert Hanke. And Norbert is the president of Hexagon Metrology. We talked about this a few times. Videos that we shot at Hexagon's 2011 conference international conference in Orlando. So you'll see that next week on Quality Digest. We're excited. Great interviews, a great personable guy.
Yeah, and it's really interesting for me anyway to listen to anybody at that level within an organization kind of talk about these aren't technical guys. And
right, he's a financial guy.
He's a financial guy. So it's interesting we're always at our level usually talking about kind of the nuts and bolts, kind of shop floor or management level quality practices. So it's very interesting what he had to say kind of from this very high level view of the organization.
He's talking about users in a large sense, who their users are, how they interact with those users. And the conference that we shot this footage at was their big user conference. So really interesting stuff. I hope you'll look forward to that. Again, it'll be on Quality Digest site this week coming up.
Yep. Also next week, Joe DeFeo from the Duran Institute brings us an article on transforming U.S. healthcare.
Very important stuff, yes.
Also, be sure to attend the live video broadcast with Michael Harry and Tom Peisdeck, where they're going to be discussing the future of Six Sigma. You'll be able to ask questions live from Peisdeck and Harry, so you don't want to miss this roundtable. Mark your calendars for July 25th at 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 Eastern. Again, Michael Harry, Tom Peisdeck, these are very notable figures within Six Sigma, been around. Michael Harry, obviously famous, and made a big name for himself in the early 80s, continued on. Peisdeck started within Six Sigma a few years after that.
Right around the same time.
These guys have been around for a long time, so if you have questions on Six Sigma, and by the way, whether you're a cynic or a proponent, you don't often have an opportunity to talk to these guys live,
right? And
you're going to be able to do that.
I would say, especially if you're a cynic,
particularly if you're a cynic,
we'd love to hear from you. We'd love to have you interact with these guys and ask questions. So
throw the hardball question.
Throw it out there. QDL again, QDL@qualitydigest.com. You can email in questions right now if you'd like. You can send them to us right now. We'll kind of queue them up and we'll have them ready for Tom and Michael. Or you can email them right online, right live during the show, and we'll throw them at them at that time.
Yep.
So great. Well, that's our show for this week. It's another good week of content here at Quality Digest, and we look forward to another one next week. So have a great weekend, and we'll see you next week.
See you then.
One, fire.